Old Style, an official sponsor of the Chicago Cubs, is proud to present this exciting new home video, The Boys of Zimmer. A total of 6 home runs to set a Busch Stadium record. Additional fireworks were ignited when Mark Grace felt that Frank DiPino was trying a little too hard to prevent more damage. In the ensuing scuffle, Grace suffered a separated shoulder. It would put him, too, on the disabled list. 9th inning lead.
There he goes. High fly ball. It's going to drop, baby. Great catch by Dutson. Trying for the double. Make it. Cubs win. Cubs win. Cubs win. Holy cow. Dutson made the play with the butt to the infield. Look at the scene out there.
After a 10-3 trouncing of the Mets the next day, the fans were calling for a sweep. But it would take a state of grace for that to happen. The series' final game was tied at 4 in the bottom of the 9th when Mark Grace came up.
The pet. There's a drive way back. What might be? Cubs win. Cubs win. Cubs win. Grace hits a home run into the right field bleachers. Holy cow. Oh, what a thrilling moment. Look at the Mets dugout. The agony of defeat compared to the ecstasy of victory.
The man who had amazed the amazing Mets was the man they called Amazing Grace. The runner-up in last year's Rookie of the Year voting had become the Cubs' leading hitter and a young star on the rise.
He's an outstanding player. He's an outstanding hitter. He does anything on the baseball field that you ask him to do it, and I don't know what else a manager could ask for.
Rarely has a player's name so well described his play both in the field and at the plate. Displaying remarkable grace, the young man is beginning to leave a mark on the game that may well prove amazing. On August 7th, a battle for first place began at Wrigley. Step by step, the boys of Zimmer were converting skeptics, and the city was rocking.
Companies are rocking all over town. There's a new sensation and it's really coming down. North side of Chicago, Waveland Avenue, there's magic in the air, a new point of view. It's been a long time now, too many years, too many losses and too many tears. But that's all over now, gonna give it to you straight. The Cubbies are winning and man, it feels great.
Cubbies are rocking. Cubbies are rocking.
Walton and Smith, man, they got the speed with Sandberg and Grace. What more do we need? Balecki and Maddox firing away. Sutcliffe on the mound. What more can we say? Now Mitchell's a man. Wild thing is his name. He comes in late to save that game. He throws to Damon or Joe behind the plate. They call him safe before it gets too late.
Cubbies are rocking. Cubbies are rocking.
Shauna's a vacuum vendor's Andre Dawson. We're talking about the man that they call awesome. That's the law, and Les has the zeros, and Popeye's the man that leads our hero. Wayne, Harry, and Steve. Now, holy cow, the Cubbies are ready right now, going all the way in this windy old town. The Cubbies are rocking, gonna win that crown.
Cubbies are rocking. Cubbies are rocking.
To nothing is a forfeit score, but the Cubs were not ready to toss in the towel just yet.
Cubs!
In the bottom of the 6th, the Cubs started chipping away at the formidable Houston lead. The lead was shrunk even further when Lloyd McClendon batted in the 7th.
There's a drive in the center field, way back, might be, hit it! A 9-4 game.
But the Astros looked like they had no intention of stopping at a mere 9 runs. With Ramirez at second, Gerald Young slapped a hit to right, and Ramirez was headed home. Dwight Smith's throw to Joe Girardi nailed him, and the Astros would score no more. In the 8th, Ryne Sandberg got things cooking with an RBI single that scored Girardi. McClendon followed with a hit that drove in Jerome Walton to cut the lead to 2 runs. Mark Grace kept the roll going with a hit, and Sandberg scored, making the score 9-8. And McClendon was only 90 feet from tying the game. Dwight Smith hit a high fly to deep center, and McClendon crossed the plate to finally tie the game. Then, in the bottom of the 10th, Dwight Smith delivered the goods again.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win! Holy cow! Cubs win! Cubs win! After being behind 9-0, Cubs win!
It was only the second time in the celebrations began all over Chicago and in one room in Montreal.
I can't believe this. This is unbelievable. We did it.
In a magical season, Chicago had grown to love these boys of Zimmer, and this was returned in kind as the Cubs thanked their fans. Everyone seemed certain there would be more home games soon. More beautiful than an autumn day at the ballpark, when your team is in first place and all is right with the world. But the Pirates didn't think so, especially when Mark Grace drove in Marvell Wynn in the first inning. Field. The next day, it seemed like only the weather would prevail. But by game time, the rains relented. The Giants picked up where they had left off, with Brett Butler getting a leadoff walk. Mike Bielecki immediately served notice that things would be different tonight.
Hey, they got him! They got him! A great ball by Mike Bielecki.
Then, in the big inning, the Giants starter was ex-Cub Rick Russell. And Big Daddy was welcomed back to Wrigley Field by Jerome Walton's leadoff single. Ryne Sandberg's triple drove him in for the first run. And then Mark Grace doubled to score Sandberg with the second run. And the Cubs' bats were blazing. By the time the light-hitting Bielecki came up, it was 3-0 with the bases loaded. Bielecki padded the lead with a single to center that scored Salazar and Dunston. And now the Giants were staring at a 5-0 deficit. Just for good measure, Jerome Walton got his second hit of the inning, driving in Joe Girardi. In an astounding first inning, the Cubs sent 12 men to the plate and scored a playoff record 6 runs. But it wouldn't be all offense for the Cubs on this big night. In the third, Jerome Walton robbed Robbie Thompson in center field with a vine-rattling catch. In a night with many stars, the brightest was Mark Grace. In the 6th, he hit his second double of the game, this time with the bases loaded. It cleared the bases and ran the score to 9-2. Les Lancaster came on in relief in the 8th, and though the Giants showed signs of life at the end of the game, the big lead stood up for an exhilarating 9-5 victory. It was a rare and glorious night in Chicago. A big win in a very big series, where it was now back to even. But there was only a brief moment to savor the big victory before packing the tools and heading to San Francisco for games 3, 4, and 5 at Candlestick Park. The San Francisco Bay Area was enjoying a warm October when the Cubs arrived. And, as everywhere, there were Cubs fans on the scene.
We're an LA-based group of ex-Chicagoans living in Los Angeles. Go Cubs!
Let's go Cubs!
In Game 3, the Giants started Mike Lacoste in place of the injured Don Robinson, and he got into trouble early. A Lacoste wild pitch had moved Ryne Sandberg to third and Dwight Smith to second. Then Andre Dawson batted.
There's a hit. One run in. Another runner on third. Dawson did it. And the Cubs are out in front, 2-0.
But the Giants came right back and scored 3 runs off Rick Sutcliffe in the first. Then, with the Cubs leading 4-3 in the 7th, there were some pitching maneuvers. Les Lancaster came in with a man on first.
There goes a runner. There's a drive into left field. Aldo might be out of here. Hit it! A home run! Robbie Thompson.
The Giants went on to win the game 5-4, and the Cubs trailed in the series 2-1.
It was a great ball game. Great ball game tonight. You know, it had everything. It was well played by both teams, and you know, they got the last big play, Robbie Thompson's homer, and you know, let's get them tomorrow.
The series thus far had been a matchup not only of managers, but of red-hot first basemen. In the 5th inning of Game 4, the Cubs were trailing 4-2, but Jerome Walton was on at first base. Signs were passed and signals were sent, but the message was clear. Mark Grace should continue to swing his hot bat.
There's a line drive into right center field. Grace with another hit. The ball skips by Sheridan and will go all the way to the wall. Here comes Walton in to score. Grace on his way to third. There will not be a throw, and the Cubs have the tying run at third.
The Giants watched as Grace was followed to the plate by Andre Dawson.
And a line drive into right center. That's in there for a base hit. That will go all the way to the wall. Grace scores to tie the game, and Dawson doubles.
The Cubs had clawed back to tie the game. But in the Giants' half of the 5th, Matt Williams hit a 2-run home run. The game ended 6-4, and now the Cubs were down 3-1.
These guys have played like heck all year. I mean, exceptional. They've done a great job. And all we can do tomorrow is come out here and try to win tomorrow to get back to Chicago. And that's what we'll try to do.
On Monday afternoon, the teams met again at Candlestick Park. Rick Russell was back on the mound for the Giants. And in the first inning, he gave up hits to Jerome Walton and Mark Grace. But unlike Game 2, a promising start did not amount to anything. Mike Bielecki, meanwhile, was turning in one of the best pitching performances of the playoffs. He kept the Giants off balance, off base, and off the scoreboard for most of the afternoon. But by the 8th inning, he had tired to the point of walking the bases loaded. Then, with the dangerous Will Clark coming up, Bielecki was lifted, and Mitch Williams came in. Then Clark, the man who had hurt the Cubs throughout the series, administered what appeared to be the coup de grace. 2 runs scored, and the Giants led 3-1. After Steve Bedrosian retired Sean Dunston for the 2nd out in the 9th, it appeared that the season was about to end. The Giants were ready to celebrate, and the Cubs were feeling the walls closing in. But this team hadn't quit all season, and with 2 outs, they staged a valiant comeback. Kurt Wilkerson singled to left to keep it alive. Then Mitch Webster singled to center, and it looked like the Giants' champagne might stay corked. When Jerome Walton singled for the 3rd straight 2-out hit, the Cubs were only 1 run back.
And it's a 3-2 ball game now. 3 hits in a row. Oh, how this team has fought. You can feel proud of this Cub Ball Club fans. They never have given up.
Images in Defeat are poignant and revealing. The